The search for the last missing Israeli captive in Gaza has become the most sensitive and emotionally charged issue in the fragile ceasefire now holding between Israel and Hamas. What began as a technical handover process, a requirement built into the US brokered truce, has evolved into a defining test of whether the agreement can move into its next phase. Officials on all sides quietly acknowledge that what happens in the coming days could determine whether the ceasefire deepens into a broader political track or collapses under pressure. Under the current deal, Hamas must return the bodies of all Israeli hostages still believed to be in Gaza. In return, Israel committed to release 15 Palestinian bodies for each Israeli captive recovered. The ratio itself has been contentious, but negotiators say it reflects the humanitarian logic behind the agreement, restoring the dead to their families, regardless of nationality, in a conflict where thousands remain unaccounted for. The International Committee of the Red Cross is overseeing the technical side of the handovers, including forensic assessments, secure transfers, and coordination between the two sides. Earlier in the week, the ICRC confirmed that Hamas delivered remains believed to belong to one of the last two deceased hostages. The material was described as findings, bone fragments, and personal effects, which Israel's forensic teams are now examining. Confirming identity can take days or sometimes weeks, especially when the remains have been exposed to combat conditions. Israeli security officials say they believe only one unrecovered hostage remains inside Gaza. The family of that captive has avoided most public comment, but a relative expressed a sentiment shared by many Israeli families who have waited through months of uncertainty. "We cannot breathe until we know he is home," the family member said in a statement released privately. Every hour of waiting is another hour of wondering. For many Israelis, the hostage issue has become an emotional core of the conflict, reshaping public opinion, influencing cabinet decisions, and forcing political leaders to justify every step. Israel's Prime Minister has stated repeatedly that retrieving hostages, alive or dead, is a national priority. At a recent briefing, he emphasized that the country would not tolerate delays or partial compliance. Israel expects full implementation of the agreement, he said. Every person must be accounted for. But within Gaza, the situation is far more complex. Hamas officials insist they are cooperating with the Red Cross, though they argue that some bodies were buried under rubble in areas bombarded earlier in the war. One senior official claimed the group is actively searching tunnel networks and collapsed buildings. "We are committed to what we signed," he said. But the reality on the ground is not simple. The complexity is also logistical. Entire neighborhoods in northern Gaza remain inaccessible, either because of structural collapse or because unexploded ordnance makes entry too dangerous. Red Cross teams have been urging both sides to allow specialized engineers to assist in clearing certain zones, but progress is slow. The organization has called the situation one of the most challenging recovery operations it has ever attempted. Beyond the technical hurdles, politics loom over everything. The ceasefire's second phase, the one that would open discussions on long-term arrangements for Gaza, cannot begin until the hostage issue is fully resolved. That phase is expected to include debates over reconstruction, governance and security structures inside Gaza, topics that are as politically volatile as they are strategically important. In recent days, Hamas leaders have floated a new position that has drawn international attention. A political representative said the group is open to discussing what he called a freeze or storage of weapons as part of a long-term ceasefire. He stated publicly Hamas is prepared to freeze its weapons if a sovereign Palestinian Authority is recognized. The statement was unusual, both in tone and in content, raising questions about whether the group is signaling a shift in strategy or simply maneuvering for leverage. Israel, however, remains skeptical. Officials say they see the remarks not as a concession, but as a political test balloon. Israeli leaders have stressed that they will not accept any arrangement that allows Hamas to retain military power or control over cross-border operations. A senior Israeli security advisor said privately that the country views demilitarization, whether managed domestically or supervised internationally, as an essential condition. No ceasefire can work if Hamas keeps the ability to rearm, he said. That is the lesson of every previous pause. The United States, which negotiated the original truce, is pushing both sides to stay committed. American officials fear that public pressure, political divides, or delays in the hostage recovery could cause the agreement to collapse. Washington has warned that a breakdown would intensify the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and sharply increase the risk of renewed regional escalation. Behind the scenes, diplomats say the hostage issue has created a rare point of moral clarity. Even countries that normally differ on Israel-Palestine matters, including Egypt, Qatar, France and Germany, have pressed both parties to finalise the recovery process. These governments argue that returning the dead is a non-political act that should transcend negotiation. Yet the situation remains fragile. Israeli military units are still operating in limited areas of Gaza to assist in locating remains. Hamas, meanwhile, is under pressure from local civilians who are exhausted by war and fearful of what renewed fighting could bring. The group's internal factions are also divided, with some leaders resistant to any gesture that could be seen as weakness. Inside Gaza itself, families of Palestinian victims watch the hostage issue play out with mixed emotions. For many, the return of bodies is a reminder of their own losses. Entire families have been left without closure. Some parents search for months for the bodies of children lost in airstrikes or trapped under debris. Aid workers say the grief is widespread and deeply personal. One Palestinian father described the emotional weight simply, "Everyone here has someone missing," he said. Everyone is waiting for news. That shared experience of loss has, in an unexpected way, created a moment of overlapping humanity across the conflict's divide. Israeli families waiting for their loved ones' remains and Palestinian families searching for their own dead are experiencing the same pain, though their political realities differ. Humanitarian organisations say that this mutual suffering underscores why the ceasefire must hold well beyond the hostage period. But the political realities around the hostage question carry their own momentum. In Israel, opposition leaders are pressing the government to ensure the full implementation of the deal before discussing any next steps with Hamas. Some lawmakers have argued that Israel should not engage in deeper negotiations until the fate of all captives is fully resolved. Others warn that without a broader vision for Gaza's future, Israel risks repeating cycles of conflict without achieving durable security. In Gaza, Hamas faces internal legitimacy questions. The group's military wing, which played a major role in the hostage abductions, views the return of bodies through a different lens than its political wing. Some commanders frame the issue in terms of bargaining power and future leverage, while political leaders consider the external diplomatic pressure. Analysts say this internal split is one reason the recovery of remains has moved slower than Israel expected. International observers caution that time is a critical factor. The longer the search continues, the harder it becomes to maintain calm on both sides. Families in Israel are growing anxious. Palestinian civilians fear reprisals if the deal falters. Diplomats worry that any renewed tension could unravel months of delicate negotiation. Against this backdrop, the Red Cross continues its work quietly and methodically. The organisation has urged all parties to protect humanitarian workers and avoid political disputes that interfere with recovery operations. Humanitarian obligations must be respected at all times, an ICRC spokesperson said. Families deserve answers. The spokesperson also emphasised that locating remains in a war zone is inherently unpredictable. Many areas still contain hazards ranging from unstable structures to hidden explosive devices. The Red Cross has requested broader safe access as it moves deeper into neighbourhoods badly damaged during the conflict. Meanwhile, families of Israeli hostages are bracing for more difficult days. Public vigils, prayer gatherings and small demonstrations continue outside government buildings. The country's political leadership knows that these families have become one of the most powerful moral voices in national debate. Their presence shapes the atmosphere of every cabinet meeting dealing with the ceasefire. In one emotional moment this week, the mother of a deceased hostage addressed reporters after meeting government officials. She said simply, "My son is gone, but he deserves dignity." Her words resonated across Israel and added urgency to the final phase of the recovery effort. As negotiations continue, the ceasefire remains fragile but intact. Diplomatic sources say both sides are aware of the consequences of failure. Israel does not want to return to broad military operations in Gaza, which would come with high costs and international scrutiny. Hamas knows renewed conflict would deepen civilian suffering and potentially weaken its own standing. The next steps will depend largely on progress in the recovery operation. If the final remains are located and confirmed, the ceasefire's second phase could begin within days. That phase would bring difficult questions. Who governs Gaza next? What security arrangements are acceptable to both sides? How can reconstruction proceed in a territory devastated by war? Each of these questions carries political risks, but diplomats say the hostage issue, painful, emotional, deeply human, has already forced both sides into a rare moment of practical cooperation. What happens next will reveal whether that cooperation was temporary or the beginning of something larger. For now, the focus remains on a single missing individual whose recovery has become symbolic, far beyond the tragedy itself. He represents unresolved grief, unanswered questions, and a fragile hope that closure, however painful, might allow a deeply divided region to take its next step. As one Israeli official put it quietly, this is not just about one person, it is about whether this ceasefire has a future. And as a Palestinian aid worker reflected on the parallel sorrow within Gaza, he offered a sentiment few observers expected to hear at such a moment. If both sides can bring their dead home, maybe the living will finally have a chance.